Alright, listen. Peacemaker is an incredible show. I'm not sure if it's the best show DC has ever produced, but it's definitely up there with some of the greats. I'm so glad that it's getting a second season in the DCU. John Cena is incredible as Peacemaker. You've heard all the usual praises before, so I'll leave that at the wayside. It's funny that it took the DCEU so long to get a show going, and that the DCU is starting with one, both of which were written by James Gunn. The strength of this show, like the others in this top tier here, lies in its characters. Are the characters as well defined as in Doom Patrol? No, of course not. Doom Patrol had 4 seasons. Is it as firmly dedicated to the ground level perspective as the Penguin? No, of course not. The main character had a skyscraper dropped on him and survived to fight an invasion of tiny aliens that puppeteer people from inside, but it maintains those strengths with its own identity. It's cool how it manages to combine some of the tone elements that Batman the Brave and the Bold had, but making it a solid R. That's just 2 things I would never expect to be together, but it makes so much sense. It can lean into the goofiness a lot of comics, especially older ones, have, while retaining genuine characters. You can make an argument for Vigilante being an exception to this though. He's also not exactly an accurate adaptation. Regardless, the characters are exactly what this video is about. They're the core of the story, so it only makes sense to bring that approach to this video. Every character on the team undergoes some kind of redemption arc at some point in the story. They hardly end the show as full-on superheroes, but their improvement as people and as a group is clear. In the Shazam video, I talked about the 3 core values that I believe define superheroism. For the next segment of the video, we'll be talking about how life, love, and hope applies to Peacemaker's core characters. So let's start at the beginning, with Peacemaker himself. He sucks. He's an absolute piece of shit. He's a racist, sexist, backwards mass murderer that somehow thinks he's doing good, even while he gets his tech from a KKK leader. The concept's pretty clear on that one. I don't think we need to understand that part any further, but just in case, Gunn made sure to make Peacemaker as hateable as possible. I mean, come on, this motherfucker literally kills Rick Flag to keep him from exposing child torture and then tries to kill Ratcatcher too? You can't get much more evil than that. And then Peacemaker comes around. It's really cool to see how James Gunn keeps challenging himself to make the most terrible people so real and human. The Guardians were an easy step because they are, at the end of the day, heroes. They may veer off that a little bit in their own self-interest, but ultimately they'll save the universe when push comes to shove. Gunn's work at DC is super interesting in that sense. His first project was the Suicide Squad. It's kind of an in-between. Some of these characters are villains, some of them are misunderstood or seemingly innocent, at least in what we see of them. Note how a lot of smaller characters are portrayed as stupid. The Weasel, TDK, and Blackguard, for example, are vulnerable from the start specifically because they're unintelligent. Team 1 has a lot of this, and that's how we build that connection. This is further used in the film for King Shark. Other ways of doing this revolves around the relationships with each other and brief introspective moments throughout the film. For a more recent example, let's look at Creature Commandos. The strongest examples of quickly building a relationship to a character are G.I. Robot and, again, the Weasel. Firstly, let's look at G.I. Robot in Cheers to the Tin Man. G.I. Robot seems to be just about the most one-dimensional character in existence. The majority of his existence is spent asking if he can kill Nazis. As based as that is, it's hardly a setup for a hard-hitting emotional character. But I gotta say, that 3rd episode, it hit. Spending time with him during World War II, but especially with Michael Rooker's character, got me significantly more invested in the character than I thought I'd be at all. It's not necessarily his emotions, he doesn't really have all that many, but the emotions we feel and impose on G.I. Robot that drive the connection with him. That's very meaningful to me, especially because he was the favorite in a few places after the first 2 episodes. As for the second example, let's look at episode 4, Chasing Squirrels. Like G.I. Robot, the Weasel isn't much of a nuanced character. He was barely in the Suicide Squad, but even there he's more of a joke than a character. He's just a silly little guy. He can't swim though, which is tragic. In Creature Commandos, on the other hand, he is vibing, he's chilling. Look at him, such a cute little fella. He catches Cersei off guard, love to see a little rat boy winning, and then this episode happens. And damn. I don't know if I agree that it's Gunn's saddest story he's written so far, but it's definitely really good. It uses the appeal of the innocence of the character to make his backstory all the more emotional. So how does this apply to Peacemaker? Well, that's an easy one. Peacemaker is the worst guy. Like, yeah, it'd be more difficult to redeem Hitler, but in terms of full fictional characters, Peacemaker as he existed in the Suicide Squad is pretty far down the list of worst people. It only gets worse throughout the first episode. The casual sexism and racism racism just cements him as a piece of shit. He's a living refutation of the core values of heroism. At the beginning, he didn't really care for life. Like, at all. He did kill his idol and countless others, after all. Outside of a deep-seated need for his father's acceptance, which is really pushing it, Peacemaker doesn't really have anyone to love. Eagly is the only relationship he has. It's love for animals that shows us that he is still capable of rehabilitation, in a sense. That's the first seed of light that ultimately blossoms. Well, maybe not blossoms, but slightly grows into the better person he turned into. Finally, we have hope. This is a tricky one. It's kind of hard to say if he has hope or not. He doesn't necessarily display overt optimism, but he's not outright nihilistic. Selfish? Yes. A dick? Absolutely. Actively hopeless? Not really. One thing's for sure. He grows on both the life and love elements. With all that out of the way, we can say that he changed a fair bit over the course of the show. For one, he distances himself from killing. This is presented from the 3rd episode, Better Off Dead, where he fails to kill a few butterflies. Throughout the season, he forms a connection with the entire group, a sort of familial love that Gunn is known for by now. And these improvements, while not massive, make it clear that this person is headed in the right direction. The point of no return for this is when he kills his father. Now, it's not like this is a complete refutation of his father's values. Sure, it signifies a rejection of racism and sexism, but realistically, this motherfucker's still an asshole. He's better, absolutely. But killing a white supremacist, while based as fuck, isn't necessarily the highest moral achievement one could make. While I don't recall any instance of racism or sexism after the death of his father, I can hardly say he's not racist or sexist anymore. He probably is. Gunn's style of writing these types of characters revolves around 2 central ideas. Firstly, we make the characters themselves pitiable. Usually the character is stupid in some way. Star-Lord is stuck in the past. Drax is unable to understand sarcasm, and Peacemaker is unable to understand social cues or display culturally acceptable behavior. Vigilante is... Then there's the second point of having something horrible happen in the past. Star-Lord's mother died of cancer and he was abducted by aliens. Rocket's creation and the rest of his backstory is shown in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Bloodsport was tortured by his father, and Peacemaker was used by his father to kill his brother and was then blamed for it. These 2 points are fundamental to Gunn's writing style and are why we connect to these characters. We pity them, then we empathize with them, and then we root for them. Now that we know how that applies to Peacemaker himself, let's run through how these ideas apply to our connections with a few other characters in the show. Emilia Harcourt and John Economos are both secondary characters that fit this bill somewhat, and are important vehicles for understanding the nuances of the 2 points of Gunn's writing. Let's start with Economos. Economos isn't stupid. Not really, but he is a type of incompetent. That's often the joke. He frames Peacemaker's dad instead of literally anyone else. He dyes his beard, but he doesn't do it right. He's still cool. He takes down Judo Master and kills a bear with a chainsaw. He just doesn't always get it. We laugh at him for some parts, but we know that he can be great. Therefore, his incompetence becomes a vulnerability that we can relate to or empathize with. Harcourt is sort of the opposite of Economos in that sense. His vulnerability allows us to feel for him, while her lack of vulnerability keeps us at bay. We like her because she beats up assholes at the bar, but we don't really empathize with her until she starts opening up. She becomes more open and vulnerable while he becomes more tough and dangerous. They both came from the same place, having worked for Amanda Waller during Project Starfish. They have the same and the opposite starting points at the same time, and that makes for very interesting dynamics within the team, especially since they're at different points in the food chain. Peacemaker picks on Economos, but Harcourt picks on both of them a bit until it all evens out as we get to the finale. Clemson Murn was a mass murderer, just a terrible guy. That's kinda all he was. The butterfly that took over his body, on the other hand, now that's a stand-up fella. He found the worst person he could find and killed him to take over his body. This is a microcosm of the theme of redemption that runs throughout the show. On one hand, there's Clemson Murn, the actual person. There is no mention of a single positive thing this man has done. Yet, the butterfly that killed him feels remorse for his murder. He may not have been good, but he deserved a chance to prove he could be. Despite his terrible life, he is still instrumental in saving the world. Sort of, we'll get to that part. The butterfly didn't really do all that many bad things. Outside of killing Clemson Murn, he's just kind of helping people stop the butterfly invasion. That's not to say that him killing Clemson Murn is justified. We don't really know the circumstances, but if you've got to choose between saving the planet from an alien invasion and the life of one serial killer or war criminal, I think that choice is pretty damn obvious. Leota Adebayo is my personal favorite character in the show. She's a sort of in-between for all of these characters. She's not as cold as Murn and Harcourt, she's not as pathetic as Economos, and she's not as idiotic as Peacemaker and Vigilante. She has dialed down parts of those characters in her that come out at different points, but she doesn't go hard into any of them. This makes her, ironically, the straight man to the entire team. She's a normal person, and on a team with such big personalities, that comes out very strongly. She has complicated relationships with everyone on the team. Between her attempted kinship with Harcourt, her sort of admiration and fear for Murn, and her whatever that is with Peacemaker, we see a lot of different sides of her that we don't really get with any of the other characters, barring maybe Chris. And that's why her relationship with Chris is so interesting. They're the two most nuanced characters. They complement each other really well. You have someone new to the whole murder business and someone completely desensitized to it. It's only after meeting that they both start heading in this new direction. Meanwhile, you have a black lesbian woman and this racist, sexist, homophobic clown. Both of their parents got them the job they're currently in, and they're both absolutely bad people, but they come from very different angles. They both learn throughout the show to turn against their parents and disavow them by the end, either by destroying Task Force X or by killing the White Dragon. The ending of Peacemaker is really interesting because it takes the theme of redemption and ups the scale. Throughout the show, we've emphasized that no matter how far gone someone is, they're never too far gone. They can be better. A murderer can help save the world. A white supremacist can unlearn his upbringing, and a friendship can be mended even after the harshest betrayal. These are all on very different levels, but they serve to emphasize the same concept. In It's Cow or Never, the finale of Season 1, Peacemaker is forced to make an impossible choice. The butterflies reveal that they're only taking over the rich and powerful of the world to set us on the right track, stop us from destroying ourselves. But they take away humanity's agency. We're left at the whims of a different species, one that we can't even see, one that has already destroyed one planet. Assuming that they're telling the truth, what is the right choice here? Help the butterflies evacuate their food source and let them save humanity from climate change, or kill the cow and let the butterflies starve, eliminating any chance of them helping us? I don't know. It's impossible to know the long-term effects of any of this. All the information he has about the butterflies comes from the government, who are ideologically opposed to them, or from his own eyes, which is fairly limited. He grew up being warned that this is what life already was. A shadowy cabal running the government to push left-leaning policies. This is obviously bullshit, but this is effectively what he would be implementing. He can choose to make the deep state a real thing, even more so than it already is with Argus and Project Butterfly, or let things go their current course. He's only just unlearned some of his far-right thinking, so he's only just coming to terms with a new reality from his own perspective, and now he has to choose for the entire world to have a new perspective. This is about redemption in the sense that he's choosing whether he wants aliens to come in and take over all of humanity's problems, or rely on humanity's ability to change for the better, our capacity for redemption, and that's what he chooses. It's somehow very optimistic. Everything is terrible at the end. Economos broke his foot, Harcourt is shot to bits, and Vigilante is in a terrible state. Murn is dead, and Adebayo has just human torpedoed twice. But still, Chris chooses to rely on humanity. We can be better, and we will be. That's the message. So the hope element is definitely there. For this choice itself, I don't think love is an inherent component here. It's present around the edges. I think the fact that Peacemaker keeps Goff and feeds him is to some degree love, but it's not necessarily true for the choice itself. The value of life is a bit of a tricky one here. There's essentially a choice between death and death, which is difficult. Peacemaker chooses to prevent the butterflies from killing people, but it's not like the people they intended to kill aren't also responsible for death. If the butterflies killed them, it'd surely save millions, maybe billions of lives through preventing climate change from exacerbating any further. So is this choice one that emphasizes the value of human life? Maybe. It's hope that does the heavy lifting. And it's that fact that makes Creature Commandos so interesting, on paper at the very least. Gunn said during advertising that it's supposed to be similar to something like the Suicide Squad, but without the sentimentality. It's not necessarily no hope, but it's definitely a different perspective on it. I've seen a lot of discourse around the show, most of it negative. People don't seem to like the show very much. I don't think I've seen that many people outright hating it, but public opinion seems to be that it's the worst of James Gunn's big two projects. I can't say I necessarily necessarily disagree with this, but I do believe people have been reacting to the show in a very weird way. First, there was the bride's flashbacks, which were very weird. There's no two ways about it, that was foul. But then there were people complaining about Alana, then there was Cersei being defeated by Phosphorus and Weasel, then there was people somehow taking issue with the way sex work was presented, then there was the ending of Nina Mazurski's story. It just keeps going on and on. And these are real issues, it's not like they're not worth criticizing, but to do that you have to engage with them, because that was, to me, the entire point of the show. Consistently pointing out how women are oppressed and taken advantage of without being able to resist, either because they're not given sufficient agency or because we culturally don't perceive it as oppression. It does rub me the wrong way when people complain about these things, even to the point of making sweeping statements like James Gunn can't write women, but then not engaging with what he's actually writing. Yes, the bride is the strong woman stereotype. Yes, Nina Mazurski is an embodiment of the innocence that we impose on women. Yes, Ilana is sexualized excessively. To talk about this, we have to engage with the ideas. I've seen people say this theme wasn't executed well, which if you see it that way, that's fair enough. But I've also seen people complain about how it wasn't resolved or how the ending was very bad. And I just can't agree with that. I do think they should have taken more time, especially at the end, but it's not a bad ending, conceptually. The bride is the only woman on the team remaining by the end, because she's so familiar with the role that women are forced into societally through hundreds of years of experience, she's capable of picking up on Alana's plans where others may not be. If they just had another episode, they could have gotten rid of the random, oh yeah, and Clayface was at the castle, here's CCTV footage, and have it be a little more subtle. Every woman in this show is a victim. You have the professor who is murdered, you have the bride who is sexually assaulted, there's Nina who is killed, etc. The only person who this doesn't apply to is Amanda Waller, who is only safe from it by imposing it on others. At the end of the day, Creature Commandos was supposed to be like the Suicide Squad, but without the sentimentality. There's no happy ending. The theme of violence against women isn't resolved, just like it isn't in real life. The Creature Commandos don't win. Some of them die, some of them survive, but they don't gain anything from the mission. I think we need to collectively chill a bit. Talking about these issues takes nuance, but so does talking about things that talk about these things, if you know what I mean. Regardless, Creature Commandos is a very clear example of Gunn's writing style for characters, because they do it in more or less every episode, and each of these episodes are very short, so these traits are more concentrated. It's definitely worth looking at the show through that lens, because it's a good way to get to understand Gunn's perspective on this type of stuff. However, I'm most interested in how this is going to continue into Superman and Peacemaker Season 2. Especially for Superman, this way of stepping into characters is perfect for someone like Lex Luthor, and has a lot in common with Nicholas Holt's previous roles. The social isolation that Gunn has as a theme in much of his work is perfect for Superman and Lois Lane. The list goes on. Given that Gunn has said that Superman won't be a comedy like much of his previous work, I'm extremely optimistic about this. The difference between what Superman looks like and what Peacemaker Season 2 looks like makes me very hyped to see how this universe will develop. Everything releasing in 2025 for this universe will be written by James Gunn, but after that, there's going to be a lot of different filmmakers working in this world, and Gunn's own willingness to swing between different ratings and audiences inspires a lot of hope in me that we'll see something really significant blossom out of this world. I'd be interested to know what you want to see done in the DCU, be it with your favorite character or just something you have a great idea for. I know I've spent a lot of time developing ideas for films to be set in a DC cinematic universe. What styles and aesthetics would you want to use? Which characters? What medium? Let me know in the comments. For me, Peacemaker is probably the best thing in the DCEU. I really love it. It lives at a high S tier, and I'm really glad it's continuing into the DCU. Now, make sure to feed your alien in a jar when wanted to starve. Have a good one.